All right. Happy to be joined by Tim Legler from the All City All NBA podcast and of course at ESPN. How you doing, Tim?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I was just joking. I'm doing great because I finally have
Yeah.
an interesting team playing decent basketball to talk about, and I've been waiting all season for that. Speaking of which, you were up in Boston on Christmas Day. So I guess obviously that is a good place to start. It was, Sixers fans I think have been waiting for a signature type win all season. I think that was only their third win of the season over a team that currently has a 500 record. So we have not had many games to really celebrate. What was your biggest takeaway from that game and their performance?
There were a few of them. I think first, the thing that stood out to me was that the Sixers can be formidable defensively to a higher extent than I maybe imagined. They really got after Boston. I thought their pressure and commitment, particularly their wings on Tatum and Brown, and Tatum had a pretty big stat line. I thought he had to work really hard for what he got. Jaylen Brown shut out in the first half. He did have a big second half, but they felt the Sixers wing defenders. They felt their pressure. They felt their presence. Kelly Oubre, Caleb Martin, Paul George, Yabusele. I thought all of those guys did a great job defensively in this game. So their defensive effort, I thought, was a level that Boston wasn't as prepared to face. That to me is the first thing that stood out. And then, Maxey was great. Caleb Martin shot the ball out of his mind, which is something that they need, that supplemental three-point shooting from these role players. And Caleb Martin has struggled all year with his three-point shooting. He's been upticking a little bit lately, and then he has this explosive three-point game, and he's going to get all the open looks he wants. As you can see, Boston didn't even guard him, and you got to make teams pay if you're going to play him that way, or you can't be on the floor. So he made them pay, and Maxey was great, and their defense. So those are the three things probably that jumped out to me. Very impressed with Philadelphia, really the entire game, but particularly that stretch at the start of the fourth quarter, and then making the plays they had to make at the end of the game to secure it after Boston made the comeback.
Yeah, it's interesting with those wings. And you could include, KJ Martin in there as well if he's able to come back from his stress reaction. But that was their starting lineup to start the season. They struggled very mightily offensively without Joel Embiid in the lineup. But that is a option against Boston that they just, for most of the Joel Embiid era, there have been people you could pick on defensively, and Boston does that better than almost anyone, whether it was Dario Saric early on, Seth Curry, George Niang was getting big minutes. This feels like a wing trio that gives Nurse more flexibility, whether it's switching or trying to trap hard and recover, stuff that he used to like to do in Toronto. I just felt like that was a more realized version than they've had for quite a while.
Definitely was. I mean, the thing I noticed right away when I'm calling a game is you just get a feel for space being taken away, from guys and just not getting comfortable. And that's what Philadelphia refused to allow these guys to do beginning of the game. I thought it was really important for setting the tone for the whole night, really. So they're very impressed with their wings. And I think, you look at a guy like Tyrese Maxey, he's not a guy that is ever going to get a lot of credit for anything he does defensively. He's not strong enough or imposing enough with his size to be like a shutdown type defender like some of these other guys I think they have can be. But he does play hard. I mean, he's a guy that's he's gonna chase you around and he's gonna give you everything he has. Paul George is another guy, like he can be elite level defensively, and they're funneling them all back to Embiid. So like when you look at all of the layers to this, it represents what you need a defense to be in this league. You've got to be able to guard guys in isolation and off the dribble and also get out to the 3-point line. They've got the length on the wings to do both. And in addition, if you are beat off the dribble, you do have a guy like Embiid back there roaming the paint. So their defense was really impressive to me. It gave them a chance, to get control early and then be able to close the thing out when they had to. The only reason this got really dicey, and you kind of had a feeling Boston would make a run, was because for the first time in the game, Philadelphia got a little lax with the basketball. Yeah. They were incredible. They had 2 turnovers going into the fourth quarter, 2. Boston didn't have a steal for the first 40 minutes of the game, which if that had stayed the entire game would have taken you back decades for the last time that had happened to a Celtics team. So that's how well Philly took care of the ball. They got a little bit loose with it. Maxey got the pressure, affected him a couple times. He had a backcourt. He got ripped by Jaylen Brown. It led to a dunk. And then Derek White hits a 3. And all of a sudden it's dicey for that little stretch that Philadelphia didn't secure the ball. But Nick Nurse felt like burning a timeout every other possession during that stretch, trying to stop the momentum in the building. and quiet the crowd down a little bit. And they had enough of a response at the end, really particularly that out of bounds play they ran. They got Maxey that layup with second and a half on the side out of bounds. Really was, to me, was the play of the game to give them some breathing room. They did what they had to do at the end, man. So it got closer than it really should have based on the way Philly outplayed Boston in this game. But it doesn't matter. You get a win on the road against a team this good. It doesn't matter how you do it.
How, because it feels like every time we get excited here in Philly, it's always, but can they keep this up? And specifically, can Joel Embiid keep this up? How do you think he looked in terms of physically, mobility, all of that?
I thought he looked very good physically. I thought he moved well. The only thing that and I even mentioned it on the broadcast, he didn't spend a lot of time in the post at all. I mean,
Right.
he had a couple of like mid ISO areas where he backed somebody down, but he caught it first at like 15, 16 feet. But for the most part, he played a face up game. Everything he did was like catching and driving from the 3-point line, shooting the ball from the perimeter. So that's the only thing I thought was still another component for their offense that wasn't on display, in addition to the fact that Paul George still is missing shots he normally makes. And I talked to Nick Nurse about it before the game. I said, if you never saw Paul George play, you had no idea who he was or what his game was, and you just looked at his career stats, you'd kind of go, oh, that's interesting. This is a pretty significant drop off from his career norms. 16 a game, 41% from the field. Like, Paul George has been better than that historically, and he's not like over the hill. He's not washed up. So what gives? And Nick Nurse alluded to the fact that he hasn't really been on the court much with Joel Embiid, and their two-man game was a big part of what they envisioned when they added him. They have no data yet because they've barely played together. So that's going to make him a better player the more he plays with Joel. And he said, just honestly, he's just missing shots, open shots that he normally makes. Why? Who knows? But he's going to snap out of it. And, he had some good looks in this game. It still goes 4 for 15, 0 for 7 from 3. So he still hasn't gotten unleashed. I think there's much more to Embiid in the post. He didn't look like he got winded at any point, but he didn't necessarily play fully to his strengths. And that's when you're really feeling it and in shape, when you've got that mix of power and then finesse on the perimeter. He was mostly a perimeter player in this game.
Yeah. I think Paul has been a little bit perplexing for some Sixers fans because I think a lot of them really appreciate his defense. I think he's been one of their better, more consistent defenders all year long. He's given them some playmaking. He's had some big scoring games, but especially since Embiid returns, it seems like he has faded back into the background a little bit. Obviously, the shooting's a big part. If he goes 7 for 15 instead of 4 for 15, we look at that game very differently. Do you think they need to do anything to sort of get him going, and specifically to try to expedite the two-man game with him and Embiid?
I just earlier, having the ball earlier in the clock and being the primary guy first, like that's the first option with a two-man game or whatever it may be, first, get you a little bit better rhythm and feel. Look, he's coming to a team with this established MVP superstar in Joel Embiid, another, emerging star before our eyes with Tyrese Maxey, who's very comfortable in that uniform, in that city, has all the freedom in the world, playing without a thought in his mind about any sort of hesitation or deference. Those guys are in a different place than Paul George mentally, joining a team with guys like that. Like, that's just an adjustment for players. And so I think part of it is he's going through that as well. But yeah, I mean, look, it's going to get better the more time he gets with Embiid on the court. Embiid's going to make him a better player because he's a magnet for multiple defenders. And that's just going to make it easier for Paul George to operate. It's going to happen. And I think once it does, he's going to have, a 5 to 10 game stretch coming up here, man, where he's up in the low 20s, mid 20s, shoots the ball 40 to 50 from the 3 for an entire month. I think it's coming because these were all good looks. And I swear every ball that left his hand Christmas Day, I thought was going in. And he's very close to breaking through. So if you're a Sixers fan, have hope. It's coming, I think.
Tyrese obviously struggled a lot with the shot to start the season. He was shooting sub 30% pretty deep into December. Has turned it around in a big way over the last 2 weeks or so. Is there anything that you would like to see? Because he's made massive jumps every year he's been in the league, to the point where I think we started taking them for granted here in Philadelphia. Is there anything that you would like to see him add to his game that would sort of like take him to the next level and also make him a little more slump proof when these shots aren't falling?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know what more you want from him. I think his field goal percentage is down a little bit this year because he would have had an unfair burden placed upon him without Embiid and Paul George. He was taking shots that were highly difficult during that stretch when he was out there playing really by himself. And from the point guard position, having to take 20, 25 shots, and I think he took 30 in a game. Like, that's just not its formula for success in terms of efficiency. So his field goal percentage is down over every other year. You're going to start to see that now uptick because he can get better shots when he's playing with other great players. So I don't know what more you could add. I mean, the guy has pretty much been a steady growth, from the first year in the league up until last year, and he's basically maintaining that, what he did a year ago. Because I think the guy read the game better than any player on the floor on Christmas. He was the best offensive player on the floor. Tatum had a monster statistical game, but it was kind of splashy when he did it. Tyrese was great start to finish, and there was no answer for his quickness and his finishing ability. His array of shots that he can get off on the move going to the rim are really special in this league. So to answer your question, no, I'm not going to nitpick him and say, yeah, if he can only do this, this, or this. I think he's doing it before our eyes. The guy's turned into a great NBA player, great NBA scorer. And, it's going to get better now. Actually, his year will get better now that Embiid and Paul George are back.
They are in a weird spot because I think everybody sort of expected them to be buyers at the trade deadline. They've got a lot of matching salary. KJ Martin specifically brought back almost for that reason, although he's played pretty good here of late before getting injured. They have gotten a bunch of picks to trade, but there's so much uncertainty of can they even claw their way back and get to where they need to be to warrant being a buyers. Do you have sort of like a threshold where they need to get back to that you're comfortable saying, all right, we can expend resources at the deadline to try to make this team better? And I guess what would you target if you were that?
You talking about in terms of like their seeding in the East? Is that what you mean? Or like their
Yeah,
record?
or even just like record or just confidence level. Like how is it just Embiid playing more often that you would be comfortable being buyers, or like what would?
It's yeah, for sure. I mean, look, at this point, it's nice that they're back. To think now that, like, okay, they're going to have some long extended stretch of health where everybody's playing. It's just not the track record, right? Even Wednesday, Embiid rolled his ankle before the game. I mean, he stepped on a security guard's foot and goes down. It looked terrible at the time because he was down for a while. I think he was probably just freaked out. Like, man, what more can happen to me? It was such a flukish thing that happened, and he plays through it. So my point is, he's on the ground a lot. He has weird things happen to him. I don't know how many games he's going to end up playing, or how, but I do know this. And I always try to make the assumption once guys are healthy, if they stay healthy. I like to say that sentence a lot around the NBA anymore because there's so many injuries. There's no doubt in my mind, like, they're going to start leapfrogging these teams. Like, they're going to catch Brooklyn pretty soon. They're going to catch Chicago, Detroit. Indiana's under 500. Like, Atlanta's one game over 500. They're in a 7th spot. You give the Sixers, these guys are all back. Give the Sixers, between now and the trading deadline, when you get to early February, you're talking about another, 5 to 6 week sample size of games. If those guys are generally healthy, maybe they get a load management night here or there, but they're not hurt. If that's the case, I think very realistically, you could look up, this team could be right at the borderline for the play-in or above the play-in line by that time. And at that point, now you start to get your sights set on teams like Milwaukee and Orlando. Obviously, they're not going to be in the running to catch a Cleveland or a Boston. That's not going to happen. Probably the Knicks either. Knicks are 10 games over 500. The Sixers are 6 games under. You're not seeing that dramatic of a turnaround. Anything outside of that, though, Orlando, Milwaukee, Miami, like those next 3 teams that represent the 4, 5, and 6, I think those teams absolutely will be in Philly's sight. And that will be ultimately, the goal and ultimately where they end up if these guys do have a long run of health.
And forget like a specific player. Is there a position or a skill set that you think they would really benefit by targeting?
Look, I'm always going to be big on trying to improve a little bit more consistency with their shooting around these 3 guys. Yeah. So I think if they can find a wing that's not a total defensive liability that can shoot the ball, I think that would be something that they potentially could add. I mean, if you want to get a bigger guard too that can defend at the 1-2, because right now you're talking about Maxey, who I said is not a great defender. Kyle Lowry is a good defender, but he's older and he's smaller. Reggie Jackson is older, not really in that vein. So if you want maybe just like a bigger guy at the 1-2 that can defend primarily, that could be also something that they could use.
All right. Well, I think we have taken up enough of your time. Thank you so much for jumping on. It was great talking hoops, and hope to do it again soon.
My pleasure. Good to be on.
We all silly like the mayor.